There was someone here that as soon as he found out about this summit, he gave me a call and asked me, Bob, is there any way I can speak? And I said, good Lord, yes, I would love to have you speak. Your case is of primary importance. His case is a gross injustice of gross miscarriage of military justice. We've just had the Marine Corps General. Well, we're now going to have Major Fred Galvin. He's going to talk to you about our MARSOC 7 Marine Special Operations Command, Force Recon. Very interesting story. And I just want to say that I want you to talk to Fred after this, and I want you to maybe collaborate on how we can get the word out on his case, because it is crucial. And if you have any pull or whatever, I'd like this man to get some assistance. That's why he's here. And I want to bring up Major Fred Galvin.
Hey, thank you very much, both to Tom Trento and Bob, for allowing me to be here and speak with all of you today, and also being able to come down and visit my brother who lives down here in the area. It was very nice. Speaking of that, Bob, I didn't know how famous he was, and then he had me out in California, and believe it or not, I've never done this before in my life, where he had me attend this hot yoga. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done that. And to show how famous he was, we ran into a friend of his. He was a governor out there, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he just kept saying again and again and again, you know, how great this man was, how famous he is. And he wanted me to let him know that, like, if I want to live, I need to come with Bob. And then we were out here recently, when it was candidate Trump, out in West Palm at the marina. Surprisingly, this big, tall gentleman comes up there with big coiffed hair and starts talking to Bob again and again, and lets me know, like, hey, thank you so much. And he had Bob sign his hat. I was really amazed, and saying how he's going to... thank you. And then one last thing, and this is really dear to me, is... So last month, Bob asked me to go to Yom Kippur in Jerusalem, and I'd never been to the Holy Land. So it was very, very important to me. And so we get out of the car to go to the temple. I was very impressed. A lot of people. Prime Minister shows up, and the paparazzi's there taking a photo, and I just didn't know truly how important a man this was until I'm not giving you any more. He disappeared on me. He was gone. So turns out, you know, the big crowd, and actually see the Prime Minister up there, and this lady tugs on me and she says, hey, who's that standing next to Bob up there? And I just fell over backwards. So I didn't know how important this gentleman was until just recently. And so I really do appreciate having me come and being able to follow behind another Marine officer. General Hagen is very, very impressive. Yes, I know the program does not have my bio in it, so I'll tell a little bit about that. And this is a photo of myself flanked by my military and civilian defense counsel when I was the accused. A little bit about a background on myself, and I don't say this to boast. This is just who I am, so that the program doesn't have it. But I was born and raised in Kansas. Went to join the Marines a week after graduating high school when I was 17, and went out to California, not where I met Bob, but like the general, I was served in the infantry. That was my first occupational field. And then I moved on to a field that the Marine Corps did not get into special operations when they stood up the Joint Special Operations Command, or Special Operations Command, in 1987. So I moved over into an organization called Force Reconnaissance, and that was the Marine Corps' elite force, and I served in there. And so I went from my first deployment over to Desert Storm, came back, and got the opportunity to do some very specialized training with some very unique individuals in Force Reconnaissance. And then in 2005, there was a gentleman who was the Secretary of Defense back then, Donald Rumsfeld, and he ordered the United States Marine Corps that you shall stand up a component, a tactical unit in the U.S. Special Operations Command. The Marine Corps had resisted since 1987. As every Marine knows, we have a lot of pride in calling ourselves Marines, and we felt that we don't need to be in the Special Operations Command. And we actually experimented with that in World War II with the Marine Raiders, who were stood up, activated, and fought very successfully for 2 years in the Pacific. And the Marine Corps did away with that. They did not want to have, and they disbanded it, saying it's not in the best interest of the Marine Corps to have an elite within an elite. So there was some opposition in the 21st century to joining the Special Operations Force, and so they created, that was ordered by Dr. Rumsfeld in 2005. I was selected to command the very first Marine Special Operations Company, and we deployed into Afghanistan as a task force, which was termed Task Force Violent. In 2007, we were in eastern Afghanistan, right on the border of Pakistan, a little area that goes into Pakistan named Torkham. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about a little bit this morning. And I want to leave a lot of time to have you answer any questions. And after I retired from the Marines 3 years ago, some of this is still fresh in my head about the military as I follow it closely. And I may have some different opinions and experiences than other individuals, but they're mine as a retired Marine and business owner in Kansas. I don't have any political aspirations, so I'll tell you what I feel. So why I'm here, on the morning of the 4th of March in 2007, we conducted a patrol into this village, and this village was sitting right on the border of Pakistan, where they take Muslims from all around the world and they further train and radicalize these men and women in that little sanctuary that often we're too afraid to go in and take direct action in there. And then when they're fully trained and ready to be employed, they send them across the border through this checkpoint, this gate called the Torkham Gate. And we were in a village. We had, and this gets into something that you can ask questions on later, because it had changed from when we conducted combat operations in Iraq, where we could just go kill the enemy. It had changed in 2007. We fell under the NATO rules of engagement that did not allow us to do what we had intelligence, what was going on in this village right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. We knew not just where the bad guys were, we knew the building they were living in, we had all the intelligence, but we had to go do this tribal leader engagement. And so as we approached this village that morning at 9:03 in the morning, a vehicle, a van filled with fuel and explosives detonates right in front of us, wounding one of our Marines. And then we had jihadists start swarming at us. So our men did what we're trying to do and made quick work of these jihadists. But we stayed there in the village after the ambush was over. We destroyed the enemy that was shooting at us, and they hit us from both sides of the road, as well as a sniper was firing at us from an elevated position. And after killing the enemy, we sent our reports back to our higher headquarters, who instantly not only knew what was going on, but it was stated in the courtroom later on that they heard us transmit our information directly from the battlefield as we were attacked, exactly the same way that our Marines had said and that I had transmitted to our forces back in the rear. What happened after that? We get back to base, and it took us 20 minutes to return. So we decided not to go in there and try to drink any chai and win hearts and minds, because we knew that's pretty foolish. And we had the intelligence that there was 4 suicide bombers in that village, and 1 had just gone off on us. And these rules, which I will agree with anybody that says they do favor the enemy, because they do. And It is a national disgrace, in my opinion, to have been able to win wars against enemies that had battleships and aircraft carriers and weapons armament and mindsets much greater than we're fighting today. And, you know, from when they dropped those bombs in Pearl Harbor to when on the starboard side midship of the Missouri, they had they had a surrender from the Empire of Japan. It took less than 4 years, and we're in Afghanistan as of this month, 16 years. It's a national disgrace that our leaders will not stand up and be leaders. And furthermore, I know our last speaker talked about lawyers making rules of engagement. That's because generals, you know, have a say. You know, the role of an officer on a battlefield, as I was trained as an infantry officer, is to, you know, there are things that happen on a battlefield, and it's to regulate the violence. And that's where the rules need to be, you know, employed by those officers that are in charge of airmen, Marines, sailors, and soldiers. So get back to what happened on 4th of March 2007, 10 and a half years ago. 20 minutes later, we returned to base. One of my Marines notifies me as soon as we returned to the base that, you know, there's reports right then from BBC, this is 20 minutes after the attack, that we had killed Afghan women and children. We started sending a lot of reports up as far as what our side of the story was to our higher headquarters, which was an Army Colonel, Green Beret, in Bagram Airfield. And then these reporters, known as you know, scripters, they have a tactic that you use. If they ambush us and they win, they win. If they ambush and they lose, they have a pre-made story saying that Americans slaughtered women and children. So ours was kind of very early on in this process. And some people say, how did this happen? And I don't mean to defame somebody that fought for our country and who's passed away, but many of you know a situation that happened in Haditha, Iraq, a place where I had personally fought. I was not with the unit in the infantry that was there, but there was a congressman named Jack Murtha who went to the press and said that these Marines killed innocent Iraqi civilians in cold blood. That's a fact. It's not my opinion. That, as well as other cases that happened in the Marines in Hamdaniya, as well as cases with the Pat Tillman case, these were all under investigation. And what happened in our case was, you know, commanders at that time in 2007 began this process that we continue today. That is, you're never going to be wrong if you investigate. You be on the side of the law, investigate quickly and thoroughly. And this is exactly what happened in our case. As you can understand, and I'll tell you some facts here. So what also happened that day in 2007 is the local tribal leaders created a lot of riots, protests in the streets. It was documented very well in the New York Times and Washington Post, people shouting, you know, death to America, death to Karzai. So the Prime Minister of Afghanistan at that time, Prime Minister Karzai, reacted, and our generals capitulated, and we were not only kicked out of Afghanistan the day after the Air Force investigating officer arrived, and he only had the opportunity to interview the Marines in our first team. So we were kicked out. That was 3 weeks before that investigation was even closed. So 7 of us who stood accused of war crimes, to include Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is homicide, punishable still to this day by death, were sent to stand trial, which ended up being myself and one other officer, which that's what led to our trial, which at that time, that was the largest number that they'd said, again, not boasting, but they said we killed 19 and wounded 50 women and children. And, you know, some of these leaders that are still in service today, still in circulation, making decisions for our country, they were the ones who, you know, I submitted a polygraph. those of you who have served, men and women, and realize that if you don't trust what it's stated, that officers have that special trust and confidence, and we serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States, if you're not going to trust that officer's word, and you're not even going to trust a polygraph from the President American Polygraph Association that's sent to the Florida and Texas Bureaus of Investigation for additional validation, and you're not even going to take my word, who was there that morning and said that, there's no civilians that were killed at all. Definitely, when we entered that village, there was no women and children even visible. It was all military-aged men lined up when we were blown up and attacked. So, yes, we were kicked out by the Army Special Operations Command. That's a whole nother story. That's like inviting your wife to meet your girlfriend. They didn't really want Marines competing for any missions, but that's a totally separate subject. Marines came after us. This trial was convened by the convening authority at order, and I have a copy of this for any of you who want to know the facts. The Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, General Conway, signed this document right here, sending us to be tried by the convening authority, which was Marine Central Command right in Tampa. It was commanded at that time by General James Mattis, who's now our Secretary of Defense, who had my polygraph, who had my word, who had the word of the 29 Americans in the Afghan interpreter that all said the same thing, that we didn't kill any civilians. So why were we investigated by 45 criminal investigators and 6 prosecuting attorneys for almost a year and sent to a courtroom for the longest courtroom trial in Marine Corps history at that time, 3.5 weeks? It's because, and I didn't serve, in any command. I was a foot soldier during my time, but there's people that want to put that blame down, when it looks ugly, and when you have a prime minister, head of a state, screaming for some action to be done, it's pretty easy to get rid of a group of Marines, especially when the locals were saying that morning that we were drunk and that we were going door to door killing people. We didn't even get out of our vehicles. We definitely didn't have any alcohol or weren't drinking anything, but this is a trend that I saw happen from the very first time we went to combat in Iraq, where Marine commanders listen to what the locals are saying and take the word, and they truly don't know the culture of what's going on in a lot of these places. But I've experienced that personally, with other units being falsely accused, and I've seen it again and again. So what about all this? And I'm asking you very briefly to think of some things in your mind of yourself, your career, your family, your children, your grandchildren, and how much they have spent in education, in their profession, in doing what they love to do, for many cases, other people. And then think in a second how an investigation could be launched on them like it's launched in places like North Korea, and their world is forever changed. And that's a reality for a lot of the men and women serving in our military today. And it's not just our case. Ours is one of many, but I'm going to explain to you exactly where our case is at right now. So, as I said, our case lasted from the 7th to the 29th of January in 2008. At that time, that was the longest trial in the Marine Corps' history for a war crime. And it took them 4 months to actually state, the verdict following this case. I've never heard of that happening. Maybe it has. I'm not a lawyer. But as some of you who have been in the media understand, when they release bad news late on Friday night, when the military does, and when they pick a weekend like they did in our case, which was, web search this, don't take my word, Memorial Day, 4 months after, on a Friday night, they released the news to Estes Thompson of the Associated Press. Not my word. Estes was there at the trial as a reporter. They gave it to him, and he released it on a Friday night, Memorial Day weekend. Some of you who have spent time in D.C. or the Pentagon, I never have, but I've worked for people and had to send them information. I know that there's very few weekends that they go down to a skeleton crew. And basically 4 days later, on a Memorial Day weekend when everybody comes back and is fully staffed at the Pentagon, it's not an issue anymore. The statement, as you can read in the press, that they stated regarding our Marines is, following this capital offense case, is that we acted appropriately. I don't know if any of you've stood in a military trial, especially a capital offense. You've probably been a witness sometimes, some of you, to a non-judicial punishment, as sometimes they do that to scare the daylights out of a young Marine or service member. But it either ends in one of three things: innocent, guilty, or dismissed. And in our case, they said we acted appropriately. They said that 4 months afterwards. And so what's the so what about all this? Why am I here telling you, am I trying to trash the military? Absolutely not. I served until they, forced me to retire. I love the Marine Corps. It's what I did since I was 17. But I'm telling you this because when I was forced to retire in 2014, moved back to Kansas, went on about my life, started a business, took care of our sister who's dying, and went to grad school. But the media, 7 years later, was still printing that we slaughtered this Afghan village. Not just the Washington Post and people who I had talked to about our story, but when your mealy-mouthed word, I'm from Eastern Kansas, so we don't use words like acted appropriate. It's either you did or you didn't, and you're clear about it. But when somebody says those weak words that you acted appropriately, that's not even something you use in a debrief. In a unit like the Marines Raiders or the Marine Corps, we stand up and say what our Marines did and what they didn't do. But that led to a lot of problems, because try to get a job if your face is on the international press walking into a courtroom where you've been accused of murdering 19 and wounding 50. It's not going to happen. And I was their commanding officer, so if even after graduating, from graduate school, and if I have applied for over 400 open positions, starting from entry level, and if I can't get a job, and I'm not asking for a job, I have a business, but I know that our young Marines, who I still personally stay in very close contact with, are having a much harder time getting regular work. And a lot of these Marines, like myself, the stigma of being associated with task force violence, so a lot of them have been separated because the Marine Corps is an up or out organization. You either get promoted or you get shown the door eventually, and that is what happened to me and what's happening to others as we speak. And they're getting out there in the workforce. And the demoralization is I asked you to think about your family and think about the stigma of if you were in charge of a team and then all of a sudden these people get promoted above you that were in other units. That hurts the entire military and their families. And that's why we can't. I was briefly speaking to some men and women who I met this morning, and they're saying what's going on in Afghanistan. Why are we there 4 times longer than it took us to win in the Pacific? Hard-fought battles like Peleliu and Tarawa. It's because right now people don't want to leave base because they're either going to get blown up, shot, or accused of something that the locals are more than willing to falsely accuse us of this stuff. So this is what goes on. People take college classes on base. People take Zumba classes on base. They enjoy the amenities that they'll throw at you, basically it's like welfare, to pay them and keep your mouth shut. The food over there is so delicious. And a lot of these bases, steak and lobster twice a week. This is not a joke. And the saying that we have in the Marines is, you eat until you're sleepy and you sleep until you're hungry. It's literally people are over there dining and defecating on high dollar diets. And we're not there to win because you have people that are going to accuse you. And our case isn't the aberration. It happens again and again. So the whole so what, and what I would like to ask of you is to dig deep into your pocketbook and grab that. Is we all have phones or some way to write something down. And especially those who have the time, this doesn't cost us anything but time, is go on the website at congress.gov/representatives. And this year, on the 3rd of January, we sponsored.
Major, let's pause and have everybody write that down if you would be so
Okay.
good.
It's www.congress.gov/representatives. And then you can find your district congressman or congresswoman. And I'm going to be very specific about this because on the 3rd of January this year, after 7 years of this mess that's kept our Marines from having normal lives, pursuing happiness, you can go and look at, and don't let your representative be weak about this. I'm not saying go stand on their desk, but a lot of them, ask them to not just vote for it, co-sponsor the bill that Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina, and that's where we were stationed, he sponsored this, and it's House Resolution 21. And to avoid any confusion, and I want to be very specific about this because there's 2 House Resolutions 21s, and some people say, well, we already voted for this, and 2 House Resolution 21s were brought forward on the 3rd of January this year. The Midnight Rules Act, which is H.R.21, was passed the very next day. And all that does is allow Congress to shoot down any federal agencies that submit, any kind of deal within the last 60 days of a new president being elected. That passed the very next day. Next week, ours will be sitting in the House Armed Services Committee for 11 months. So if you want to kill something, just slow roll it. That's the midnight. So ours is H.RES.21. And if you web search H.RES.21, what that says is we're requesting that the Commandant of the Marine Corps, who's a senior Marine officer in the Marine Corps, officially state that the Marines from our Special Operations Task Force were not at fault for the ambush on 4 March. That's what it says. And that's what it has said. It hasn't had any wording change whatsoever. And there's a lot of men and women in this room who I know are patriotic and who love our country, and those who support it and fight for it. This is how you can pick up your phone. You don't have to do it today, but Congress is still in session until November 16th. So on Monday or whenever you have time, again, you don't have to stand on a desk or beat somebody up, but you can ask them to co-sponsor this and get it moving so it doesn't die on the operating table. That's it. Yes, sir.
Major, I am going to overrule the Major here. You do have to do it today. What you paid to be here today is pittance. I lose thousands of dollars to do this because it needs to be done as a public service, especially in a place like what we're from. Not asking a lot of you, but what I am asking of you is to do what the Major asked for you today. If you put it off tomorrow, you're busy, you're this, you're that, whatever, you won't do it. You don't do it within the first 24 hours, it doesn't get done. That's all I'm asking you to do. On the honor system, the U.S. military works many times, certainly in the academies, on the honor system. I'll be doing this again April 28th, 2018. If you don't do this, if you can't shake my hand and look me in the eye and tell me you've done this, then you're not invited back.
Before I go to questions, thank you. I want to mention because we were attacked so many times in the press following my retirement, and as those who have served realize, once you're out of the service and you retire, if you're an officer, anybody could say whatever they want after you're out of the service, but if you're an officer and you're a retired officer and you're on a pension, they can come after you if you say something that's untrue, because it's a false statement. So when we were attacked, like I said, I was doing other things as a retired Marine and civilian back in Kansas, but this still continued to have a lot of consequences when it was again, and it was repetitive. And it had been happening over the years, but when it happened when I retired, I said enough. And in 2015, I went to the press, and not all the press will even entertain this because we're talking about the beautiful bald eagle which is our military. Nobody wants to say anything, but we have to be honest with ourselves. And if this happened, which it did, and I'm here to tell you everything nasty and ugly, but this in fact happened to us. So, you know, a lot of people will say, well, we just don't want to hear about this. We don't want to cover it. If a congressman gets something back from the Office of Legislative Affairs that says, nothing really happened to these Marines, I'm here to tell you, do not accept that as an answer, because it is plaguing our Marines who are not able to get work, because this is all we're asking to say is we're not at fault in this ambush. It's plain and simple. And I know it was embarrassing, and like in a lot of religions, people don't want to reverse themselves, nor do our military leaders want to say, after something was happened and they use those words, acted appropriately. That's not good enough. And that's what we're asking. This doesn't cost a dime to our budget or to anyone in this room to call and do this. And what it may mean to you for extra ammo is, in 2015, when I went public with this to the press, I've spoken to over 65, this is the first time I'm speaking to a room, but 65 members of the media. I've spoken to many more, but a lot of them don't want to cover it. But over 65 members of the media have ran stories or put it on the radio. Many of you may have heard it on, you know, Frank Gaffney or Audrey Russo. I've been evangelizing, trying to get this word out. However, the Marine Corps, nor anyone in the Department of Defense, has ever said any word. I mean, the facts are the facts. They have my polygraph. Nobody's disputed a single word or sentence that I've said. So you can please use that. That, you know, there's nothing that these congressmen, who some and women don't want to take risks. There's no skeletons in the closet. Nothing bad or nasty is going to come back and haunt them. As some of those congressmen and senators, was any of your Marines discharged dishonorably? No. The answer is no. Our Marines didn't do anything shameful. So with that being said, thank you for your support, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Major Galvin, my name is Norman Bell. I'm a chapter leader for Act for America. Do you know whether or not Act for America has ever got behind your cause?
They have not.
Okay, we're over 500,000 strong. Afterwards, let's talk. I need to present a portfolio to them that would entice Brigitte and other members to get behind your cause.
We'd appreciate that. And this can be won very quickly and easily, but it takes the people of the United States to understand the destruction that this is having to a group of Marines and to our whole military. But I'd love to talk to you after any time today. They're handing it over.
Thank you very much for your service. Thank you, sir. I wonder if you could have any explanation why your military officers didn't back you up.
I'm going to be honest with just my opinions, and very quickly, because I know we're compressed on time. I saw when I was a young, infantry Marine, and then became an infantry officer later. I was enlisted and officer. That a lot of people, they allow things to influence them, and it's basically, I felt it was due to self-preservation. And a lot of that time, people want to get promoted. Maybe it's a spouse that influences them not to take the risks. But there are so many men and women out there that not just join, but put the uniform out every day, wanting to fight. And they deserve, the Marine Corps, the U.S. Marines was modeled after the British Royal Marines commandos. And, one of their sayings in the UK is every service member is owed competent commanders. And we have a lot of people that will not stand up. I mean, for this to have gone to trial that long when they had the facts, and for it to, it's not the comment on the Marine Corps is unaware of this congressional act. It's because people don't want to do their duties, as the general wanted us. He swore to our Constitution which invokes the name of our Creator, our God. And they don't feel that connection and that obligation. It's greater than a responsibility. It's saying that you will die for our way of life. And people forget that, unfortunately.
First of all, thank you, Major Galvin, for your courageous service. We really respect you in applaud your courage. Secondly, I would like to know, are there any other co-sponsors as of yet for this H Resolution 21? Do we have any other co-sponsors besides Walter Jones?
Yes, this is, it's not a partisan issue. Congressman Ruben Gallego from Arizona, who's a Democrat, he is also a combat veteran from the war in Iraq. He was a young enlisted Marine who fought there. He has co-sponsored this, as well as Jeff Fortenberry, who is a Republican from Nebraska. Jeff is not, I'm sure some of you have contacted your congressmen and women before. And a lot of people try to say, well, I'm not on the House Armed Services Committee. Well, guess what? Nor is Jeff Fortenberry. So you can co-sponsor this, and you don't need to be on that committee. And you can at least tell your constituents, which are your people that you're representing, that you will vote for all, not just all look into this and get some weird, sideways answer from the Pentagon's Office of Legislative Affairs on, well, this is what really happened. These Marines, they are doing the Jedi mind trick. These Marines are actually okay. I would not have flown down here and put my business on hold in Kansas if everything was okay with our Marines, and it's not, and nor is it with their families. This needs to get straightened out. This is the kind of stuff, as some of you have also understood, when you twist the truth and when it's about your life, you are doing generational damage to people, because this did not happen. We just had leaders that it was more convenient to listen to what Karzai said and take the action that he was urging. So.
Yes, sir.
I was under the impression that the rules of engagement that Obama instituted were eliminated when President Trump came in. That hasn't happened?
I believe he recently modified those. And I'm not here to bash our military. I didn't just serve those 26 and a half years. When you take in the hours, I devoted my life. I love it. But the gentleman who was instrumental, and you can look at videos of then Colonel John Nicholson, who's the general in charge right now of all forces in Afghanistan. He was the one that urged to kick us out. He made public statements to the press saying that we killed 19 and wounded 50. Those are his words. And you can watch videos right now of the man who's in charge. So, you look at, as mentioned in our Civil War here, that we lost, the battle that we lost, more Americans than any, shed more blood in Antietam. We had weak leaders, a general, 4 stars, General McClellan. So our rules of engagement don't make any bit of difference when you have leaders that, I guarantee if we had the right leaders, Afghanistan would be a speed bump, which it needs to be. It'd be done and over in a year. They're using Kalashnikovs made in 1947, and that's what we're being stopped by. We have carriers right up the road, submarines have carriers too, but submarines from up in Georgia can destroy this world. And we're fooling around with farmers wielding, weapons from last century. That's a joke. It's a shame. So the rules of engagement changing, but the fact of the matter is, if we're led by, the teams I root for in Kansas City, like the Kansas City Royals. If Ned Yost lost the next 16 seasons, he'd be contacting a realtor. He wouldn't be put in charge of the Major League Baseball, and that's really what's happened. And I'm not here to bash people, but I'm just saying facts are facts. We've been losing to, and we have bigger threats with Iran, North Korea, electromagnetic things that can truly affect the entire United States, and we've been fooling around with these guys.
I have a quick question about the rules of engagement. It always confused me. I'm a PFC in the United States Marine Corps. Someone gives me a piece of paper and says, all right, you aren't allowed to shoot till you shot at. How does the rules of engagement ask you, is this some airy-fairy thing that nobody really knows what to go look up? What is the actual procedure for saying, this is what I need to do?
This is very important because, the rules of engagement say if there is a hostile act or hostile intent, you just have to feel like you're threatened and you can defend yourself. Well, we weren't feeling like we were threatened. We were blown up by a car bomb. And we had jihadists on both sides of the road swarm to kill us in what's called an ambush site, a kill zone. They pulled a vehicle in front of us so we couldn't leave, and a mob of men swarmed at us, and we were getting shot by a sniper. Yeah, but the reasons that those don't work is because you have commanders that are like, hey, I'm gonna come after them. And that's where, I mean, the rules of engagement still are, if there's a hostile act or hostile intent, or if you feel threatened, you can do what you need to do to defend yourself. That makes sense, but the thing is do you think that frontline foot soldier is going to take any action if he thinks that he's going to be they don't even want to leave base most of the time. And our plan now is to train these, specifically in Afghanistan. I mean, read the headlines just this last week about, the Afghans that we're training, the vehicles we're giving them, how they're surrendering these vehicles and they're being used as car bombs to destroy our bases. I mean, we have to get some serious leaders that have the goal that either you win or you're gone. And that's not how things are being ran right now. I'm just telling you the truth from what I experienced.
Are they written down anywhere?
They are written down, and they get written down and briefed to the frontline foot soldiers, and some of them are classified, but they are what is stated, the idealistic, what's in a classroom, and what that theory, how it's translated down the guy on the battlefield or gal, is two different things. It's not clear, and it's not safe, and it's not winning.
I would like to recommend that you be lead for the review of the rules of engagement.
You can look up, I've been in combat many times, and I'm labeled as a black sheep in the Marines, so that wouldn't happen.
I have one observation of the comment that was made earlier. The question is, why did they not respond? And I have a feeling that the history of Vietnam and Lieutenant Calley may have been foremost in someone's mind.
Well, that is very similar to what happened in our case, but our case, we were innocent. Our case is similar to the My Lai 6, massacre of the 21st century, but it did not happen.
At that time was first bachelor's history. I was President Bush.
Yes. So, and we spoke before this that it's weak leadership that goes all the way back to, President Ronald Reagan was our last leader who had an offensive mindset and that was willing to truly fight for and defend our nation as it needed to be. And when we've had, weak leadership, I'm not running for office, so I'll tell you, we have allowed situations like Iran and North Korea. And the unit that I was last in command of when I retired in 2014, we went into Libya the day after Benghazi fell because we were sitting over in Rota, Spain for 3 months getting information, from Ambassador Stevens to reinforce Libya. But our leaders won't even allow us to defend our own people who are requesting it hundreds and hundreds of times. And that's not Republican or Democrat, that's just, leaders today. He's got the microphone.
There's a term I haven't heard used here, and that is lawfare. We have faced this in Boston from CARE. This sounds to me like it's a different use of lawfare. I was wondering if several of these incidents, as you indicate, there are many of them, were tied together to show that this is a way that the enemy is using our own laws against us. If this were published, would that have some effect on the Marine Corps?
It has already had devastating effects as our enemy, they've done their mission analysis. I love the Marine Corps. I went to all those schools, command and staff, I studied, and I did everything they required me to do. But I will say the average person that sat next to me, the reason I left the infantry to go into Force Reconnaissance and into Special Operations is I wanted complete commitment. And I see that more of that in some of our enemies, especially those who study us and understand that they can use that thing, the camera, a microphone, the media, just like they did in 9/11. They used what we created against us. And they're doing it right now where they use the media and the World Wide Web to scare the living daylights out of commanders on the battlefield of taking any true action that can win. And that's That's what, to answer your question, I mean, they studied our laws and they realize America's a society based upon laws, and that they're gonna twist the truth, force an investigation, and hamstring us and put us on the bench. And that's what's going on right now, because we don't put that special trust and confidence down to the small unit leaders and say how it's supposed to be, how I was taught at Infantry Officer Course, that rules of engagement will be regulated, that violence will be regulated by the unit commander. That's what that officer is there to do. And instead we have subcommittees of Congress. I don't want to get too political. I know a lot of people have questions.